really need to ban firearms and specifically handguns and assault weapons. I think this is a public health issue.
We see the realities of gun violence on an almost weekly basis. These are not rare events. These are not events that are occurring in other countries, in other cities. They're happening here.
And for the rest of us, recognize Gun Violence Awareness Day by joining me in wearing orange. It looks good on everyone.
Yeah, no, none of that works. So year after year after year after year, usually after a mass shooting or during the election, we keep hearing calls for greater gun controls, that more gun will cause more death, just like these Yankee barbarians. Doctors, politicians, activists, actors, and usually their very wealthy friends are all banding together to flood normie brains with propaganda. They say that unless weapons are solely in the hand of our governmental betters, we will soon live in a world that would make Mad Max look like Disneyland.
I know that we can vote out those who are protecting guns rather than our lives. I think my generation will bring the change no matter how long it takes.
We've got to stem this flow, and the best way to do it is by criminal background checks and extreme risk protection orders or red flag laws.
We feel very strongly that Minnesotans have made it loud and clear they are ready for gun violence prevention measures, common sense reform.
No matter where you are in the world, these groups, almost all of them socialist left-wing, are going to make the exact same claim, so let's try to be objective, shall we? And before we start, remember kids, the first rule of statistics is that an absolute value has no value.
Teenagers, often showing off guns to their friends and siblings, end up shooting them instead. While accidental shootings account for only a fraction of firearm deaths in the US, gun safety advocates have long argued that they are largely preventable.
Thank you, Captain Obvious? I mean, seriously, this is like saying you're more likely to cut yourself if you own a kitchen knife. My best guess is that they are confusing, or I say confusing, but really they want to conflate suicide chance with owning an actual firearm, which makes very little sense considering someone suicidal has a plethora of methods available to them even if you were to remove all firearms. That was actually one of the major arguments for banning guns in Australia, that if you had less guns, then you would see less suicides. And strictly speaking, you had less suicide with firearms. Problem was, the other methods of suiciding actually went up, and globally, the rate at which people were killing themselves was going down at the exact same speed as it did before the gun ban. And that's a running theme with all of these groups. They do not actually care about the suicide, they care about the guns. And when they move the goalposts to people hurting themselves, I'm sorry to break this to you, but you cannot fix stupid with bubble wrap. There is a say in engineering. You can idiot-proof all you want, nature will just come up with better idiots. As for the unintentional wounds themselves, they are far less likely to happen with a gun than with a knife. And I'm talking per capita here. The obvious next step would be homicides. A common talking point of activists is that more gun equates more death, and they love pointing at the USA as a proof of that. Problem again is, unlike activists, stats do not lie, they can only be misread. So if we dig a little bit deeper than the absolute value of 40,000 dead per year, more or less, we find that only 14 to 15,000 homicides are committed per year. Everything else is made of suicide and accidents. Anyway, if we dig a bit deeper, we find that the highest murder rates are not found in the places where the most guns are located, like, a shooting range, but in the giant left-wing controlled cities that have made it very difficult to acquire a firearm, at least legally. For example, if you want to own a restricted firearm in Quebec, like I do, you need to pass 3 exams and you also need to have a club membership that costs hundreds of dollars every single year. In some areas in the US, it's actually worse if you can believe it. Tim Pool talked a little bit about the lunacy in New Jersey and ended up being gifted an AR-15 from Steven Crowder in one of the latest shows. I put a link inside the description box below, it's pretty fun to watch. But let's get back on track. So we know where the homicides are coming from, but who is actually shooting who? The answer to that is pretty much the same in every single country, US, Canada, France, etc, etc. Like I said in my mass shooting video, almost all of the gun violence is gang shooting other gangs, and in no small part over control of the drug market. For the general population, however, the homicide rate is pretty damn low. If you were to look at Canada, the homicide rate of licensed gun owners such as myself is only of 0.6 per 100,000 inhabitants. In the general population, the homicide rate is 1.69 per 100,000 inhabitants, which means gun owners, whether they have quote-unquote assault weapons or not, are not the issue. In all honesty, you have more chance of being hit by a truck than dying in a shootout, and ironically, I did get hit by a truck. didn't feel particularly good. But on the off chance that you would be in a situation where your life is in danger, like, having a flag anywhere in range of a peaceful Antifa protester, or defending your friend's pawn shop from peaceful looters, you will find yourself in a situation where you can very likely be killed and police will be at best 10 minutes away. Like I said before, it does you no good that the police will be there in 10 minutes when you got 10 seconds to live. And I have to point out the hypocrisy of all these activists that are currently calling every single cop and police force brutish, racist, fascist and whatever they can think of, when we all know that they will be calling 911 as soon as the riots come to their neighborhood. The same weapons that are only used for?
These weapons were designed for one purpose and one purpose only: to kill the largest number of people in the shortest amount of time.
This guy is just a human parrot. So gun control is definitely not useful in reducing crime, it's not useful in reducing homicide. The only thing that seems to have any effect is reducing the number of gangs, which the US has an army of. We are talking at least 30,000 gangs and at least 1 million gang members. Almost every single one of them located in highly left-wing areas who seem to have absolutely no interest in fixing the problem. In one of the most delicious backfire ever, a lot of people have realized that this right to safety touted by activists is nothing but an illusion and are now emptying the gun stores. But the biggest argument regarding the futility of gun control is a technological one. As machine tools get cheaper and cheaper, like the CNC machines, it is going to become impossible to regulate anything. Right now, anyone can go online and find blueprint for the AK-47 or the AR-15. With a slight amount of effort, you can easily program a CNC machine or router to build a complete receiver set from a simple block of aluminum, thus making a ghost gun, something that is feared by politicians such as this idiot right there.
This is a ghost gun. This right here has ability with a 30 caliber clip to disperse with 30 bullets within half a second.
Worse for said idiots, it's actually pretty easy to make firearms, even simple ones. On my mass shooting video, I did talk about the Japanese retiree who was making firearms in his spare time, and if you watch the channel of Mark Sobu, then you know you can make a functioning shotgun with 2 pieces of tubing and some welds. If you have access to a CAD software, you can even make up your own rifle. In my case, this is a version 2 of a rifle that I made, and it's compatible with most of the AR-15 parts. That way I can get around the issue of manufacturing my own barrels, for example. I am currently working on the version 4 of this particular rifle, and if you have any knowledge on how to use SolidWorks, you can do just as well as I do. The other big issue is obviously 3D printers. Some of you may remember this entirely 3D printed pistol in 22LR, but the technology has made a lot of progress. For example, right now we have the technology to make fully functional 3D printed plastic receiver sets for Kalashnikov type rifles. And I completely expect that in a few years we'll have the technology to print at home full receiver sets for Kalashnikovs, AR, really any kind of rifle that we may want. You could argue ammunition is going to be a problem, and you'd be somewhat correct because smokeless powder, the propellant used in modern cartridge, is not as simple to manufacture as black powder is, and there is a big variety of smokeless powder as well. For example, a change in powder between the design phase and the field use was what caused the M16 in Vietnam to have a lot of problems. However, this particular issue is going to be overcome by the advancement in battery technology. It may sound weird to you, but you have to remember that the technology we are currently using is essentially the same as when we had flintlocks. A chemical charge is ignited to propel a projectile. The reason why I say I think the next evolution for rifles themselves will come from batteries is because as the capacity of these batteries gets better and better, probably within the next 10 years, we'll see firearms switch from chemical charge to magnetic fields. I'm thinking specifically of what we call a coil rifle, which is something that already exists but is limited by the batteries themselves. Essentially, instead of igniting a powder charge, the projectile is thrown using a series of coils to generate a magnetic field that will be pulling the projectile forward. This kind of rifle would not require any sort of engineering knowledge. You could literally download a diagram on the internet, get your component, and start building like you would with a piece of IKEA furniture. So between people realizing that they have to take the self-preservation seriously, 3D printing, a bit of SolidWorks know-how, and electronics, gun control is a concept that is on its deathbed. It has been for a really long time, and I think we might finally see it end in a few years, at least in North America. For Europe, I'm afraid it's really going to take an actual revolution from the people to do anything. In the meantime, if you have enjoyed that video, share it around, leave a like, subscribe, and hit that bell, and I'll see you next Sunday. Salut, bonsoir.